Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the Christmas ferry has not delivered for Kiwi Rail. Its plans to replace the clapped-out inter-island fleet have just gone down after the government refused to cover a massive budget blowout. The Finance Minister is live. Sticking with the theme, cruise ships are causing chaos for Auckland's ferries, but the port boss is making a big promise to commuters. He joins us. An early morning shooting sees a children's bedroom window peppered with bullets. A U-turn on road speed rules will cost more lives, according to a road safety charity. We talk to Auckland businesses trapped in road cone hell and the heists where the target ain't gold, it's chocolate. You can watch us live on the RNZ website. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. The future of the Interislander Cook Strait ferry link is in question, with the coalition government rejecting a request for more funding to replace the fleet. Kiwi Rail first announced plans in 2019 to replace the ageing ferries, but the government says the project's cost has now almost quadrupled to about $3 billion. Finance Minister Nicola Willis says she doesn't have confidence the cost will not blow out further.
It's because people didn't do the work at the beginning, which to me seems pretty obvious, that if you're going to get much bigger boats, they're going to require much bigger port facilities and wharf facilities. That wasn't adequately costed, it wasn't adequately scoped. Then when after the fact they've gone to look at that, the costs just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Nicola Willis says ministers have made clear to Kiwi Rail that it expects the state-owned enterprise to prioritise providing reliable, safe and enduring ferry services. Kiwi Rail Chair David McLean acknowledges the disappointment for those involved with the project, but says he respects the government's role as a funder to make the funding decision. The Prime Minister is defending his government's move to scrap smoke-free legislation, saying smoking rates will still go down under his watch. Hundreds of people have rallied on Parliament's lawn and in Auckland to protest the Coalition's decision to repeal some smoke-free laws. They've presented a petition with 45,000 signatures asking the government to leave the legislation alone. Christopher Larkson says there are good reasons to repeal it.
We think it will encourage a black market, we think it will encourage more crime, and as a result we're sticking with the status quo. But don't mistake that that's not a commitment to lower smoking rates. Smoking rates have lowered tremendously over a number of decades under a number of governments. They'll continue to do so under ours.
The legislation being repealed would have banned the sale of tobacco to anyone born after the 1st of January 2009. Regional Development Minister Shane Jones has disavowed responsibility for the oversight of infrastructure spending during the COVID-19 pandemic. The New Zealand First MP was Infrastructure Minister in 2020 when two funds totalling $15 billion were unveiled. The Auditor-General has today delivered a stinging critique, saying ministers should have ensured better transparency and value for money, but Mr Jones isn't accepting any responsibility.
No, you're not being fair. Matua's been banished for 3 years. I can't be held responsible for 3 years of Grant Robertson's. No, Grant Robertson was there for 3 years. You're being unfair.
It talks about a lack of rigour, lack of transparency. Do you think that's fair?
No.
Finance Minister Nicola Willis says the investigation proves how cavalier Labour was with money. A woman who lives in an Auckland suburb where an early morning shooting happened today says she'd consider moving out. A house on Holland Avenue in Point England was shot at just after 1 o'clock this morning, shattering a bedroom window where two children were sleeping. Another resident on the same street, who has two school-aged children herself, says shootings seem to be happening more often.
It raises a lot of alarm bells. I mean, we're immigrants here. We came from New Zealand because of the cell, that it's a peaceful country and whatnot. Maybe because it's of the place that we live in, but it's also in other neighbourhoods as well.
After a long night of wrangling, a new draft climate deal has been published at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai. An earlier draft generated a backlash as it stopped short of calling for fossil fuels to be phased out. The draft is meant to reflect the consensus view of nearly 200 countries at the conference. The draft deal will specifically call for transitioning away from fossil fuels. If adopted, it will mark the first time in 3 decades of COP climate summits that nations agree on a concerted move away from oil, gas and coal. To sport now, and Auckland City concede they were simply outclassed after being eliminated from the FIFA Club World Cup in their opening match. They were beaten 3-0 by Al Ittihad in Saudi Arabia, with the Saudi side including French stars N'Golo Kante and Karim Benzema, who both scored goals. Auckland midfielder Reggie Murati says the team certainly didn't lack an effort.
Our coach said, stick to the game plan, express yourself, just show what we're made of. I think we did that. Obviously, we would love to go into the next round, but they were just too good for us. We tried our best, and it just wasn't us.
Meanwhile, Manchester United have been eliminated from the Champions League after being beaten 1-0 by Bayern Munich. Arsenal's advanced to the round of 16 following a 1-1 draw with the Dutch side PSV Eindhoven. Test players James Fisher-Harris and Georgia Hale have been named the Men's and Women's Players of the Year for New Zealand Rugby League. The award will come as no surprise, given that last week the pair were named the respective winners of the International Rugby League's Golden Boot Awards. And former Black Cap fast bowler Derek Sterling has died after a short illness. He was 62. Sterling played 6 tests for New Zealand in the 1980s and played first-class cricket for Central Districts and Wellington. Meanwhile, the West Indies have beaten England in their opening T20 match in Bridgetown. The hosts chased down England's total of 171 with 11 balls to spare. That's the news.
Chris Bishop says Tuesday's storm was unbelievable.
Police officer said it was like being a Wizard of Oz. He was driving, he looked up, and at one point there were corrugated iron and trees in the middle of the wind next to him.
A special bird is spotted in Colombia.
You can tell immediately that you've got a bird that's a bit strange. One half is the female colour and one half's the male colour.
And pets take pride of place in Christmas festivities.
Include them in the family traditions, whether that's the meal or gifting or getting dressed up. We've even got matching owner and pet pyjamas.
Your Best Friend, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. In the west, from Northland to Taranaki. Also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Isolated showers. Clearing tomorrow morning and fine breaks increasing. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods developing tomorrow evening. Westerlies rising to gale south of Hastings tonight. Easing tomorrow morning. From Whanganui to Wellington, also for Waded Upper, cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing this afternoon, fine and cloudy periods tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine apart from a few showers in Buller and Northern Westland today. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy with a few showers, clearing to fine this afternoon, cloudy periods tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine apart from coastal showers today. And Chatham Islands, showers gradually easing tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi ewe, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Is Kiwi Rail's plans for a new green fleet of ferries absolutely sunk? The government's refusing to kick any more money into replacing the ageing Interislander ferry fleet following a massive cost blowout. The ferry operator had asked for an extra $1.5 billion, but the government says the cost of the project, including harbourside infrastructure, has quadrupled to $3 billion since 2018, and there are no guarantees it won't go higher. Now, Kiwi Rail's board has told the government it will have to wind the project down and start from scratch. And joining us now is Finance Minister Nicola Willis. Tēnā koe te minita.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
Why is it a no from the government in terms of the extra funding?
Because we cannot see that this is good value for taxpayer money. The cost of this project has almost quadrupled. It has had a pattern of cost blowouts, and it has completely departed from the original project, which was meant to be about replacing the ferries. 80% of the cost of the project now is actually about redeveloping port infrastructure. It's not about replacing boats. And so we can't be confident that we will get good value. We do want to ensure there are safe, reliable ferry services. We are prepared to invest in that, but we need to do it in a way that provides the best value to taxpayers.
Lot in there, Minister, so let's get down to some of the details. KiwiRail signed a $500 million contract in 2021. Where does that leave things? Are we liable for any money?
Well, KiwiRail will now work to resolve any residual contractual obligations they have, and it's important I don't prejudice those negotiations and discussions that they will have. What we are focused on is working with KiwiRail and our officials on alternative options to ensure an enduring connection between the North Island and the South Island.
Okay, I know you don't want to prejudice those conversations, Minister, but just answer these questions if you could, please. Has money changed hands, and have the ferries, has construction started on that already?
Yes, money has changed hands, but no, construction has not started on the boats yet. I understand that KiwiRail has spent approximately $400 million to date, but they have not begun construction of the ferries themselves.
You say you're committed to a safe and reliable service. I mean, what happens in the meantime? Do they have to keep using those clapped-out ferries, and how long for?
Well, it's important to remember, Lisa, that even if this project progressed, they would continue to have to use the ferries that they currently have. And that's because the proposed big ships they were replacing them with weren't due to arrive until 2026. So between now and 2026, it remains the government's expectation that KiwiRail do everything it must to maintain ferries to ensure they are safe for passengers, safe for freight, and provide a reliable connection between the two islands.
So, Minister, the 2026 date, that was when the new fleet was supposed to arrive. So is it your expectation, and have you told KiwiRail, that you expect them to have a solution in place and operating by 2026 still?
I have conveyed my expectation to KiwiRail that we work together to get an alternative option so that we have an enduring and reliable connection. And yes, that means beyond 2026. And look, Lisa,
yeah, but
the
KiwiRail
advice
says that will
given,
take years, Minister. They say it will take years because they'll have to start from scratch, basically. And this is a vital connection, right? It's going to take years.
Yes, it is a vital connection. But let me give you a sense. What we are talking about here is boats. And there are options for how we replace those boats. The Ferrari is not the only car in the garage. And at the moment, the option that KiwiRail has had on the table is the equivalent of the Ferrari. And now we're going to go off and see whether there are some good, reliable Toyota Corollas available.
Or Teslas.
Which might mean that we don't need to spend... Or maybe Teslas. And maybe then we won't need to spend so much on a really big hangar of a garage.
What do you reckon is a reasonable price for what we are wanting? Because you've said it's quadrupled, right? Up to around $3 billion, and that's a chunk of change, right? What do you reckon is achievable with what budget?
Well, it's a huge chunk of change and much bigger than was originally envisaged. And what I'm conscious of, Lisa, is every dollar I spend replacing the ferries is a dollar I can't spend on replacing a classroom, on building a new hospital. And so what I'm focused on is the best value for money in delivering a safe, reliable ferry solution. So I think I owe it to taxpayers to say, hey, this project's been blowing out. I actually think it will continue to blow out. I need to take a step back and see if there's a better value way of delivering ferry services across the strait.
Understand your position. In your statement, in your media statement that you put out, you say that agreeing to the request would reduce the government's ability to address cost of living pressures. So do you mean that you wouldn't be able to afford the tax cuts if you paid the money that they wanted?
No, I just mean that there isn't a money tree at the end of the garden that means that we can just have...
But that's your cost of living package, though, isn't it? It's the tax cuts. So that would be in jeopardy, according to what you've said in that press statement?
No, this has nothing to do with that. This is about the fact that every dollar we invest in capital projects as a government, we have to be confident. We can look taxpayers in the eye and say that's the best use of that dollar, and our government no longer has that confidence in this project.
Appreciate your time, Minister. Good to talk. It is the Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, there. The government is not going to be topping up that Kiwi Rail budget blowout for the new ferries. Let us know your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 13 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Labor is calling on the Health Minister to honour his Hippocratic oath as crowds gathered begging the government to reconsider repealing smoke-free legislation. The government insists it remains committed to reducing smoking rates despite budgeting $500 million a year in tax revenue from tobacco sales. Our political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
Now, what do we want? Smoke-free. When do we want it? Now!
A collection of doctors, nurses, youth workers and politicians gathering in front of Parliament, calling on the government to reconsider plans to repeal New Zealand's world-first smoke-free laws.
It's just about saying something, speaking up, standing for our people, and it's nice to see everyone come together.
You know, just listen to our people. Yeah, we're doing this for a reason and for our tamariki.
It's very disappointing to see this happen because I want our generation, the younger generation, to thrive and not smoke tobacco or vape and things like that.
Speakers, including former MP Hone Harawira, the Greens health spokesperson Huhana Linden and Labour's health spokesperson Dr Aisha Verrill, did not mince their words.
The plan is let people die. We want the money so we can give tax cuts to our rich mates.
Our world has changed. We are world leaders, and yet this government is putting it all in the ashtray.
The National Party didn't campaign on scrapping this law. It wasn't originally in the New Zealand First manifesto. This is the result of a dirty deal done in a back room.
As Health Minister, Dr Verrill passed the legislation to raise the age of purchase, reduce the number of outlets and reduce nicotine levels. She's accusing her successor, Dr Shane Reti, of breaching his Hippocratic oath.
If I were in that position, I would have resigned.
The minister says he is committed to driving down smoking rates.
I have an obligation to drive down smoking rates as we do collectively as a government.
A petition with 47,000 signatures was handed over. Portato Clark and Keelan Renata from Rangatahi group The Hashtags specifically chose to hand it over to Parliament's youngest MP, Hana Rafferty Maipi Clark.
She knows what it's like, and no doubt she's the closest generation-wise to have been involved in what's happening.
Hana Rafferty Maipi Clark told the crowd the message was simple. They want a smoke-free generation.
You can't take Te Aka Whaiora out and then put smoking in. You can't take out phones and then put cigarettes more accessible for kids. The math isn't mathing.
In Auckland, protesters gathered near the Domain.
Hey, hey, ho, ho. This repeal has got to go. Ho, ho. Hey, hey, smoke-free has got to stay.
Donald Mayo, a junior doctor who helped organise the rally, says keeping the smoke-free legislation will make the government's job easier, as it'll reduce the burden on the health system.
By keeping this legislation, we could actually save $46 billion of taxpayer money, and that's both through the direct health savings, but also improved productivity. And the thing about that is that's all money that could go to making our health system so much better for everyone.
A new survey commissioned by Health Coalition Aotearoa and Otago University tobacco research group Aspire has found 67% of people either strongly supported or supported keeping the laws. But surveys and protests are so far falling on deaf ears. The government is pressing ahead.
A flicker of lights, a huge roar, a cyclone of glass, and then it was all over in a flash. Wild weather and what some witnesses have described as a mini tornado wreaked havoc in Lower Hutt yesterday afternoon. Today, locals are picking up the pieces. Somya Bameripati reports.
For Lighting Direct Manager Damien Townsend, today is a day of waiting for insurance, building assessments and the green light to reopen. He was at the back of his shop when the wall started to collapse. He ran to the front of the store and arrived just in time to see the whole glass frontage shatter.
The roof sounded like it was going to lift off,
They came out into the middle of the store, then saw the front of the store blow out. So that was the front doors, glass smashing, glass coming inside and outside. So it was this real vortex of swirling motion and kind of sucking, like it was just sucking the guts out of the store.
Neither his staff nor customers were injured, but those next door at Holy Bagels weren't so lucky.
I think at least one customer of theirs who had been injured, and they said that it was a head injury because their roof also collapsed in as well. So they weren't giving first aid to that person in the back of their store, and they were waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Hopefully they're okay too.
Over on Cornwall Street, Griffin Armand is helping clean up his 82-year-old Nana's place. She was lucky to receive only minor head injuries when a lean-to and garage collapsed around her.
At the time she was trying to get her washing in, and so that kind of fell onto her. There was about four wheelie bins outside her house that morning because it was rubbish day. That blew into where she was, and it kind of held up the lean-to. So she had a little gap in there that she was able to crawl out of.
The house has a preliminary yellow sticker, meaning it can't be inhabited. Further down the street, the local family store has had its windows on two sides shattered. Hutt City Salvation Army Assistant Pastor Cameron Miller says there were about 24 people inside at the time. He says most of the store's furniture and half the clothing is now unusable.
The glass was everywhere downstairs in our in the family store, and so it's in everything. So anything soft, anything permeable, there's little glass fragments and flakes and things in it. So we've had to get a team in here this morning and start disposing of some of that, unfortunately.
Upstairs, the charity runs a food bank, but that's had to close until the damaged ceiling can be repaired.
We'd have 30 families coming through here, receiving their food parcels and also some gifts and some extra things for Christmas. Unfortunately, that hasn't been able to happen today, and probably just for that safety, we'll have to put that off tomorrow, and then hopefully up here we'll be able to open Friday.
Outside, Moana Moeahu has just pulled into the Salvation Army car park and is shocked by the damage.
This is where I get my food, this is where I get my clothes, this is where I get everything.
She's hoping the store will reopen soon and says a lot of families rely on it, especially at this time of year.
Devastated. I mean, gee, I was hoping to get another Christmas present. No, can't do that now, eh? So, where am I supposed to go? Do I have to go to Upper Hutt or Wellington? Johnsonville, do we have got petrol to go all up there and back? No, very sad. I feel for our community.
The brief but violent storm leaving a lasting impression and a lot of clean-up for the Lower Hutt community.
It's 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think should happen with the Interislander ferry fleet. The government is not kicking in any more money, and Kiwi Rail says that means going back to square one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anaya Evi, mena pita kōrero.
The Finance Minister says she doesn't have confidence that Kiwi Rail's budget for replacing the Interislanders will not blow out further. Kiwi Rail first announced plans in 2019 to replace the ageing ferries, but the government says the project's cost has now almost quadrupled to about $3 billion. Nicola Willis told Checkpoint that Kiwi Rail had departed from the original project, which was to replace the current ferries and was now mostly focused on developing the ports. The Prime Minister says there are good reasons to repeal the Smokefree legislation after a petition signed by 45,000 people was presented to his government asking them to leave the legislation alone. Christopher Luxon says smoking rates will still go down under his watch. A new draft climate deal has been published at the COP28 Climate Summit, specifically calling for a transition away from fossil fuels. If adopted, it will mark the first time in 3 decades of COP climate summits that nations agree on a concerted move away from oil, gas and coal. The Regional Development Minister, Shane Jones, isn't accepting any responsibility for the oversight of infrastructure spending during the COVID-19 pandemic. The New Zealand First MP was Infrastructure Minister in 2020 when two funds totalling $15 billion were unveiled. The Auditor-General has delivered a stinging critique, saying ministers should have ensured better value for money. And the latest polling in the US shows it will be a close matchup between current President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump if the two end up running against each other in elections next year. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, it looks like all the main routes are moving at their usual place for this time of the afternoon. Our next news headlines and traffic are at 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. Auckland City's part-time footballers were no match for their wealthy Saudi opposition at the FIFA Club World Cup in Jeddah today. The Auckland team lost 3-0 to Al Ittihad and were knocked out of the competition, sending their players back to their jobs as teachers, salespeople and tradies, whereas the Saudi team, which includes a player earning more than $150 million a season, move on to the next round against the champions from Egypt. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. I'm still back at the $150 million, Felicity, but anyway, tell us more about Auckland City's underdog battle at the Club World Cup.
So this is Auckland City's 11th appearance at a Club World Cup. This is a tournament that brings together the top club teams from different leagues around the world, and it's a knockout competition all for a trophy. And so Auckland City are quite dominant on the local football scene here in New Zealand. They've obviously have won this competition locally 11 times to make it through to this qualification for this next step. But every time they get up against the world teams, they know it's a little bit of a battle. For all of their appearances, their best finish was third in 2014. That was the year that Real Madrid won the tournament. And they've finished last in this 9 times. So they kind of knew today was going to be a little bit of a difficult one for them. Looking at the team sheet, they're up against players of global stars. They've won English Premier League titles, played in European Championships finals, and Karim Benzema. So that's the player that was on the $115 million a year. He joined the club and it was around Saudi. It doesn't have caps on their transfers, so that allowed him to pick up that large chunk of money. He became the first player to score in 4 Club World Cups today. And another Frenchman alongside him there was N'Golo Kanté, and another one. Big names in these teams that these amateur players are coming up against, and just even looking across the field, it was quite a big deal for them. And as one of the midfielders, Reggie Murati, said he didn't know when he'd have another chance to play in front of 50,000 people as he did today, and here's how he summed up the match.
Obviously we had a game plan, but coming in versing a bunch of pros, they definitely showed their quality. We were just trying to catch up with the pace of the game. Based off of that, again, the second half we definitely showed some quality, put in a big shift, but yeah, the first half kind of was the defining half of the game.
Murati did say that a couple of his teammates were lining up to get Benzema's shirt. He missed out on it himself. He reckons it was the substitute Emilio Tade who actually managed to grab it. Murati got his opposite player, the number 12 from that team, and he was quite stoked to walk away with that. So at least he's come away with something from this tournament.
Mm-hmm. Very cute. Controversial Australian tennis player, this is Nick Kyrgios, says he doesn't want to play the game anymore. What's wrong?
Yeah, well, Nick hasn't been playing much of the game. He's only played 1 match in 14 months, and that's due to wrist and knee injuries. He had already withdrawn from next month's Australian Open. He made that announcement on OnlyFans. But as speaking on a podcast, it was hosted by Britain's Jay Shetty, Kyrgios said he was exhausted from the grind of the tennis tour. I don't really feel like playing anymore, to be honest, he said. I only want to play for about another 1 to 2 years and be at the top and go down on my own terms. He told Shetty if he had his time over, he would never have picked up a racket in the first place. Now, some of this rhetoric isn't surprising. We've heard Kyrgios throughout the years maybe not be so in love with tennis as what you might expect a top player to be. And even though he's not playing in the Australian Open, he will be behind the microphone. He's going to do some commentary at the Grand Slam. So
how old would he be now?
He's 28.
Right, okay.
So got a few more years in him if he can come back from these injuries. And as reluctant as he might be to get back on court, he is planning on a return in 2024, so it'll be after the January Grand Slam at the Australian Open, and he does still have a protected ranking of number 21. So you could still see him in some of the top ATP Tour events, even if he doesn't make it into the Grand Slams.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. A road safety charity believes a U-turn on a policy that's seen lower speed limits on some roads will cost lives. The government plans to stop what it calls blanket speed limit reductions. The Labor government introduced 80k an hour speed limits on some highways and lowered the limit to 30k's an hour around schools. The new Transport Minister says he wants a system that gets people places faster, and he told Checkpoint he plans to introduce variable speed limits around schools that only apply during drop-off and pick-up times. Caroline Perry is from Break, New Zealand, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Caroline.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What do you think of this government's policy around speed limits?
Frankly, it's extremely frustrating that we're having these same conversations around speed in 2023, despite a wealth of evidence from both New Zealand and overseas about how lower speed limits help to reduce road deaths and injuries and have other wider benefits as well. So we're really concerned about this plan and the potential for it to put lives at risk.
Is faster ever safer, based on the research that you've seen?
Look, in terms of speed is such an important part of road safety, because whether or not it's the cause of the crash, it will be a factor in the outcome and the likelihood of someone being killed or seriously injured. So basic physics tells us that the faster you go, the bigger the impact and the more likely you are to be killed or seriously injured. So whilst we have some motorways, for example, that are built to very high safety standards that can take faster speeds, most of our road network is not, and has an awful lot of hazards and has speed limits attached to them that do not match the conditions of the road.
Because the Transport Minister, uses the example of the Waikato Expressway here because it's got one of the highest speed limits in the country, if not the highest, and he says it's the safest road in the country. But you don't think that's a fair comparison or example to use?
Yeah, it's not really an appropriate example to use because it's been built to a 5-star safety standard. It's got various safety features like median barriers. It has slip roads, not intersections. It's essentially a motorway. And when you look at the International Road Assessment Programme, IRAP, and the NZ version, Kiwi RAP, which is used to assess roads and the appropriateness of speed around them too, yes, roads that are built to that standard can operate more safely at higher speeds. But as I say, the vast majority of our road network is not built to that standard, and there are lots of other hazards around them.
Speeds around schools under this government will reduce at drop-off and pick-up times, so not for the whole day, drop down to 30 kilometres an hour, times yet to be decided, having talked to the Minister yesterday. What's wrong with that plan? Because kids aren't at school, the whole working day per se.
So, firstly, we're talking about children's lives, so we just need permanent lower speed limits around schools, and it's something that we hear regularly from schools and students and often the local community too. That the issue with drop-off and pick-up times is that it assumes that there are only children, pedestrians, cyclists around at that time, and that's not the case. There are lots of schools that also have childcare centres, playgrounds, swimming pools, other community facilities that are used at different times, all sorts of breakfast and after-school clubs, sports on a weekend, school holiday programmes. So there are so many different examples from school to school as to when children are going to and from school, as to when those facilities are in use by the wider public as well. So just having lower speed limits at drop-off and pick-up time isn't enough.
Caroline, is there any evidence to suggest that maintaining a speed limit through an entire day, a speed reduction, creates better motoring habits? And I mean in the sense that drivers are more consistent. It's 30k's all the time, so they get it, rather than on and off with the speed limit.
Yeah, evidence shows that the simpler we make it for drivers to understand what the speed limits are, and that the easier it is for us to all keep to those speed limits and to understand what's needed around different areas of our roads. And that's why, one of the reasons why it's good to have it in place at all times as well. But also, 30 kilometres an hour not only around schools but in urban areas and communities, has wider benefits too. It makes it feel safer. It helps to encourage people to walk and cycle more, which has environmental and health benefits too, and it also helps to ease congestion.
Thank you for joining us, Caroline. That's Caroline Perry from Break New Zealand. It is a road safety charity. Interested in your thoughts on that? 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio to talk all things business. What are you talking about, Nona? I've lost my piece of paper.
I'm going to be talking about the current account deficit.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the country is continuing to live beyond its means. And what you might think that means is this, that we have to keep on borrowing to pay our bills. That's not so good at these times, and especially with high interest rates. So what do we know? Well, the current account deficit, which came out for the quarter ended September, showed that even though we've been seeing more dollars, tourism, earnings, and so on, it wasn't enough to offset a drop in the price of some of our exports, softer dairy prices, as well as meat. And on the other side of it, the imports was mostly fuel. It's costing more for that to come in. I was just looking at another bit of numbers that we got for last month, that petrol prices had come down a little bit, but over the year they were up 11%. So that's where we're seeing that difficulty in our trade with the rest of the world. We're just not making as much and we're spending more. That's basically it.
And it's also, costing more to fill our bellies up as well?
Yes, indeed. Yes, because we had a selection of consumer prices today.
Right.
Amongst them was the food price index. The food prices, well, they were cheaper overall, in November over October, and that's mostly because there was a drop in the price of fruit and vegetables. People probably noticed that, but that's what you normally would see at this time of year. That helped us a little bit. There was a 0.2% drop. Now that could be hardly noticed in a grocery shopping trolley. However, the prices on the year earlier were up 6%, so you would notice that. And what kinds of things might have been those added up to that? The fruit and vegetables, despite that they were down, they were still 4.8% up on the year earlier. Meat, poultry, fish, an increase of 2%. These are annual increases. Grocery food up 7%. And what you drink, non-beverage, non-alcoholic, 7.5 gain. And one of the big increases was in restaurant meals, up 8%, and foods that you take home from the grocery store that are ready to eat. There were other things that happened. We had, we had housing. So, for example, rental prices were a little bit down in the last month, but overall 5.5% up on the year earlier. So there's a lot of numbers there. Most of them show that we're paying more for everything. There you go.
Righty-ho. Well, let's do the markets then, Nona.
Let's see if there's something better in this, right? Okay, the top 50 index, it ended up 0.8%. That was a gain of 93 points to 11,476. We're going to be hearing from the U.S. Federal Reserve overnight on what they might want to be doing with interest rates, which is always what's important when it comes to the dollar. 61 cents U.S., 93.2 Australian, 48.6 British pence. Oil prices have dropped because there's an idea there that the global economy is slowing down, might not need so much oil. Anyway, we'll have a lot more to say about this tomorrow, no doubt.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 24 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about transport, speeds on roads and the ferries. Government is not going to top up the budget for the Interislander replacement ferries and infrastructure. Ed's got in touch to say our ferry service is part of State Highway 1. The government must fund it. Welcome to the real world of government, Nicola, this listener says. Cheap costs more in the end, unreliable and short term. This one too. We can all buy our own dinghies with our tax cuts. What's the problem? Someone else thinks it's a great call from Nicola Willis, re the Cook Strait ferries and port infrastructure. Kiwi Rail suffers from incompetence, and yet more incompetence, and the public are rightly fed up, says Tim. Tim's from Christchurch. You want tourists? Then New Zealand needs larger, safer ferries with new dockside infrastructure, says Sue. Another listener says construction has started in Picton on the ferry infrastructure, so what now? And what does the Minister expect the cost of developing a new ferry plan will be? There is always a cost to creating a plan again, both financial and in time. If delay was assigned a financial number, I wonder if a new plan can really cost less. Cost of living is about reliable public services, not just money in individuals' pockets. Sticking with the transport theme, lots of opinions on the roads and speed limits too. Gary says New Zealand roads are not designed for fast speeds. There are a few potholes out there, Gary, no doubt. Another listener says most speed limits were introduced due to increased numbers of deaths on those roads. Using the Waikato Expressway as an example was designed and has the safety features in place. We have a 30k speed limit around my neighbourhood. It's made the neighbourhood so much safer and more pleasant for people out walking, says this listener. Still get the odd driver doing 50k though. I say plan your day better. Your lateness shouldn't compromise my safety or the quiet neighbourhood, that listener says. And I think one more before we move on. Hasn't the Transport Minister heard that the faster you go, the bigger the mess? Especially when Kiwis aren't great drivers and neither are our roads much good. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and there's the email address, which is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to get to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
The Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, says Kiwi Rail has completely departed from its original project plan to ensure the Cook Strait ferry link continues to run. She told Checkpoint that 80% of Kiwi Rail's proposed $3 billion project is now about developing ports, not replacing ferries. The government has rejected the company's recent request for more money to fund the project. Legislation to axe fair pay agreements has passed its second reading. The House is in urgency as the coalition pushes a suite of law changes through before Christmas. The Grocery Commissioner is challenging supermarkets to keep a lid on food prices in the run-up to Christmas. Pierre van Heerden says there is a real opportunity for the major players in the $25 billion supermarket sector to bring some Christmas cheer to shoppers. Tourist towns along Australia's Great Barrier Reef are bracing for a tropical cyclone set to hit the Queensland state coast today. The first winds have already cut power, and authorities warn the weather could worsen when the storm hits land. Tropical cyclone Jasper could bring wind gusts of up to 140 kilometres per hour, large waves and the risk of flash flooding. And Air New Zealand is working with Elon Musk's satellite internet service provider, Starlink, to introduce free internet on board its domestic aircraft. It's set to be running in late 2024 on a single jet and will then be rolled out across the fleet in 2025. The service will let passengers stream videos, instantly message friends, and allow multiple devices to be connected. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, nothing unusual to report in and out of our main centres around the country this evening. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Evie. 'Tis the season for thieving, and according to a police retail crime unit, shoplifters are honing in on tasty high-value treats like chocolate, beauty products and trendy sneakers. The unit that was set up in mid-2022 targets some of the country's worst shoplifters. Retail New Zealand estimates there's $1 billion a year in losses from retail offending, and a supermarket customer spoken to by Checkpoint has twice witnessed brazen chocolate heists from an Auckland supermarket.
Predominantly, it's smaller things that can be easily sold on or used themselves. I think you made mention of chocolate. That has been something of the recent times where chocolate has been taken, but certainly beauty products are still a really highly stolen item, as are things that are like Eclipse mints in those, the tin cans. We still see meat and cosmetics are a huge one that is taken. But depending on where the things are taken from, or the items are taken from, really dictates what they are. So, the electronics people will see things like cell phones can be taken, or computer hardware can be taken. It's kind of all over the show, really. There is, in clothing retailers, we do see shoes being targeted. Nike is particularly targeted, and Jordans as well. But it's kind of across the board, really.
So in that case, when you mention the shoes, they're going for high-value items that are kind of on other people's wish lists. I assume they're trying to on-sell them, those kinds of things.
Yeah, or they could be using them for themselves. There's schools of thought for both camps here, whether they're on-selling them or whether they're using them themselves is, it's up for debate, really.
Let's talk about the chocolate for a minute. We've had a listener who has witnessed a couple of occasions where people have virtually filled up a supermarket trolley and just rolled out the front door with it, and chocolate that's higher priced stuff. What are you seeing in terms of those kinds of food goods, and what do you think's happening to the stuff that's stolen?
The major supermarket chains are putting in security interventions to make it a lot more difficult for thieves to take entire trolley loads of items, but you can still obviously carry them out in a basket. We do see chocolate going from the larger chains, but not just chocolate. Like I said, beauty items really are a hot commodity as well.
And what are you seeing in terms of violence? Is violence being used, or do people just wheel the stuff out the front door?
Predominantly, most of the offenders are wanting to go about their business unchallenged, unnoticed. They are more likely to commit offences on locations where they know that they can go about their business being undisturbed. We've seen some really good results where stores have made an approach to a person, even just to say hello or how can I help you, and that has had a deterrent effect in it.
How sophisticated are some of these thieves in terms of the means that they use? And whether they're using other people to help them, distractions. In one case, one shopper told us that they saw someone using a chilli bag, which they filled up with the goods and put in a trolley, and then only swiped a couple of items in order that they could get through a self-serve checkout when they had hundreds of dollars of other stuff hidden away in a bag. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing in terms of level of sophistication?
It goes from really one aspect to the other. There's the simple ones that just walk in and grab things and blatantly walk out with them. There's definitely that regard. And then you've got the examples of where, like you said before, where people will fill up entire trolley loads, although we're not seeing that as much now. But you've also got the interaction, like you just said then, where they'll pay for some of the goods and then not for a remainder. And again, there's really some really smart technology being used to assist the supermarkets, certainly in relation to identification of that kind of behaviour. But it really comes back to, again, just that human touch and having those conversations with people when they're in those self-service checkouts environments.
I noticed earlier this week that police made an arrest of someone that they described as a prolific shoplifter, and they said it was about $71,000 worth of goods. What kind of values are you seeing in terms of what's being stolen?
Certainly, some of our most prolific shoplifters are up and around that figure. It's not uncommon for the National Retail ISU to prepare a file for court that may have 30, 40 or 50 offences of shoplifting across, it might even be across the North Island, and in some cases across the North and South Island. So some of these people are quite prolific, yes.
So this specialised unit, the retail crime unit, has been going for what, about 18 months now, would it be?
Yeah, something along those lines. We got staff in about June 2022. So yeah, they've been up and going since about then.
Can you just give us a bit of an overview of the progress you've made during that time?
So the unit is Auckland based, but it's a national team, and we gather all of the evidence to enable the police district staff to be able to go and actually arrest these offenders. So we don't fly around the country as such and arrest people. We bring all the evidence together and make it much more simple for the frontline officers to then go and make those arrests.
So it's the unit's job to target the worst of the worst in terms of shoplifters. I mean, how big is that list? How many people are on it?
Well, the best thing that I can kind of say in relation to that is that we're actually reducing the amount of time before somebody will come onto our radar. We've about halved that instance. So we're getting to people a lot sooner if they are becoming a problem. And if they are, recidivists and they've come out of jail or something like that and they're committing offences, we're getting onto them a whole lot sooner and managing those people. But it's an ever-growing list.
And that was the head of the National Retailer Investigation Support Unit, Matt Tierney. Here's the supermarket customer that we spoke to, and he has twice witnessed people, taking chocolate in big lots from an Auckland supermarket.
These two young lads had the big trolley loaded to the brim with Whittaker's chocolate blocks, and you can imagine the value would have been absolutely huge. And they were coming out the inn, and suddenly the staff were yelling and screaming, and everything was pretty chaotic. I suddenly twigged that they were pushing the trolley out without paying and rushing out the door. So I thought, well, I'm going to follow these guys and just see what the deal is. And so by the time I got out the front door, they were loading all the chocolate into the boot of their car. So I thought, well, this is a bit stupid. So I took a picture of their car and their and who they were. In the meantime, the staff had contacted the police. I heard this in the background. So I went up to these guys carefully and said, hey, what are you doing? The cops are on the way. And suddenly they panicked and they slammed the boot and off and running. Fortunately, a police car arrived just as they were leaving, so I sort of pointed and the cops were after them pretty quick. But then I looked around, there's a trolley load of half full of Whittaker's chocolate blocks. So I went back with quite chuffed, if you like. So with this half trolley full of Whittaker's chocolate blocks and presented it to the manager. I thought afterwards, well, I didn't even get a chocolate block for all my efforts.
Now, that's not the only time you've seen, shoplifting in progress, is it? You saw another incident, and was that chocolate too? Yes.
So in general terms, I noticed that this customer was taking the chocolate blocks, and I thought, oh, that's a lot to take, and I didn't think much of it. But when I got to the checkout, I noticed that the customer didn't pay for the blocks, and they just paid for a few items that was in their trolley. And I quickly alerted the staff to this fact. And next minute, the customer's pushing the trolley out the door pretty quickly. And before the staff could react, and because it's well known what the staff do, they lock the trolley wheels. But unfortunately, they didn't lock it quick enough, and the customer was wheeling the chocolate blocks along with a couple of other items out the door and gone.
And that is a supermarket shopper who witnessed a couple of chocolate heists. It is 10 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. 2 children were sleeping when bullets hit their bedroom window this morning. The second shooting within 4 months has an East Auckland street on edge, with some residents considering moving out. Police say they are in the very early stages of an investigation and cannot say whether the shooting in Point England is gang-related. Our reporter Emma Stanford has the story.
Holland Ave residents in the East Auckland suburb of Point England are terrified.
Just hearing about this is a bit scary. We've been here for nearly 10 years, 11 years, and this year is probably the most terrifying year that we've lived here.
Just after 1 o'clock this morning, police were called to the property after reports of gunshots. They found several windows shattered, including one in a bedroom where 2 children were sleeping. One person had a minor injury from broken glass, but police say it was only a matter of luck that someone wasn't seriously hurt. When RNZ went to the door, adorned with a Christmas wreath, a woman answered, only to say everyone was okay and did not want to comment further. Knocking on neighbours' doors today, they were stunned to hear the news.
Shocking, yeah. I mean, there wasn't shooting at the park a couple months ago, but I don't know, we've lived here for like just over a year now. And I don't know, we kind of see this neighborhood as being quite quiet. Yeah, but that's a shock.
That shooting was in August, just 2 streets over in Taurima Reserve. 3 men have been charged with murder in that investigation.
It's becoming more casual these days, like the shooting 3 months ago in the park nearby, and now this, right? So I got the link because a friend sent it to us, thinking, because we've got 2 kids, school-aged kids, thinking this must be you, and then the street is Holland Avenue. And I was like, what is this? And they're like, ooh.
Nearby neighbours didn't hear anything.
No, nothing. Sound asleep, knocked out.
Do people feel safe in the area now?
I mean, I do, you know. I mean, people have the things that they say. We tell people we live in Point England, and they say, oh. it's like, what was wrong with Point England? But yeah, no, I feel safe walking around here.
No, I don't. Not after what happened. That's happened a couple of times in this whole year.
It raises a lot of alarm bells. I mean, we're immigrants here. We came from New Zealand because of the sell that it's a peaceful country and whatnot. Maybe because it's of the place that we live in, but it's also in other neighborhoods as well. What's going on?
The house is owned by social housing agency Tāmaki Housing, which says it is saddened to hear of the incident and it has checked on the well-beings of the whānau and neighbours. Police want to hear from anyone who may have witnessed the shooting or any suspicious activity in Holland Ave this morning.
Businesses along Auckland's Great North Road say roadworks are turning customers away during the crucial pre-Christmas period. The roadworks began last month as part of Auckland Transport's Great North Road project, delivering walking, cycling and bus improvements over the next 2 years. And as Louise Tanuth reports, some businesses are so sick of waiting for customers to walk through the door, they've decided to take their business on the road.
So we've got tiramisu, vanilla glaze, pineapple pie, eggnog, creme brulee and jam and cream.
This isn't quite business as usual for Dough Donuts. Co-owners Grace Torber and Janine Doobie would normally be at their main store on Great North Road in Grey Lynn. But for the last month, roadworks from Auckland Transport's walking, cycling and bus improvement project have been going on right outside their door, affecting parking and putting off customers.
It's just caused absolute havoc in the area. There's road cones in places where literally nothing happens all day from 9 to 5 and it's just a waste.
Well, I'm getting a box of 4. Yeah. I will get a tiramisu. Yeah. A creme brulee. Yeah.
So instead of waiting for customers to come through the door, for the last few weeks, twice a week, they've taken their donuts on the road, parking up their pink van near offices in South and downtown Auckland.
We just thought it would be a good idea to make ourselves more accessible to our customers rather than expecting them to come to us. And we have this great van which has got a custom fit out in the back. We see coffee carts and sushi trucks drive around to offices all the time, so we thought, why can't we do it, especially during this time? We'd like the extra sales because it's missing from the Grey Lynn store.
Today they're at Plunkett Ave in Manukau, where many office workers are lining up for a sweet treat.
So I was like, I'm just going to duck in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grace says because of the roadworks, they now have nowhere close to park, which is causing safety issues for staff.
Our staff start at 5 a.m. in the morning, sometimes earlier if we've got really busy days, and it's just not safe for us girls to be parking at that sort of time blocks away from the actual shop.
The roadworks will pause for the holiday period on the 15th of December before starting up again on the 3rd of January next year. Grace says that doesn't make sense from a business perspective.
I mean, it would make more sense if they worked over the quiet period so that businesses could actually get more business.
A few doors down, Mary Jane Heather, who owns Rose and Heather Furniture, is echoing this concern.
Right on Christmas, so it will be too late then. For me anyway, for sales.
The business has customer parking around the back of the building, but Mary Jane says the roadworks and lines of cones put people off even stopping. When Checkpoint visits, she jokes she's in her gym clothes because she doubts there will be any customers today.
I'm expecting no one in this week at all. Didn't have anybody in last week. There's no one around, just cars trying to get through the traffic. Did you see anyone on the streets? No.
Across the road at Better Me Espresso Cafe, owner Vicky says business is down about 20%. She says compensation from Auckland Transport or the government while the roadworks continue would ensure businesses can stay afloat, something she says isn't guaranteed right now.
Not sure how many business around here could survive, especially small business like us. It'll be nice when it's done, between now and then, how we're going to survive it.
They raised concerns about parks in front of their shop being blocked off and have managed to keep a few. But they're only for 10 minutes each, and the side streets that customers used to use are now inaccessible. And the noise from the roadworks is a major issue.
It's just really loud. I think they probably start around 8 o'clock in the morning and then finish around 2 or 3.
On Auckland Transport's website, it says it's retained parking on Great North Road where possible, but had to decrease some spaces to improve intersections. Extra car parks on side streets have been created, along with 5 large loading zones for businesses. The main construction for the Great North Road improvements is set for the start of next year through till mid-2025. So for now, businesses will need to get used to this.
Time for some of your feedback before the news at 6 on speed. This listener says just picked up a $200 fine today, 50k in a 30k school zone, plus 30 demerit points. Wow. Fair cop, the listener says, and I learnt the hard way, fully agree with lower limits around schools to keep our kids safe. But another person says nobody is paying any attention to the new speed limits. They are total nonsense. So hopefully National will sort this out in due course. What is the point of 30 kilometres an hour at 8 p.m. at night? And Julian says regarding the speed limits, if we were all serious about reducing CO2 emissions, we would reduce the open road speed limit to 80 k's just for that reason. On the ferries, this government must really hate the South Island, this listener says, as well as Wellington. Too many ministers based in Auckland obviously have no idea how essential the inter-island ferries are to us. Crazy decision. They wouldn't have won many South Island votes if this had been in their manifesto. Lynn says, what a short-sighted decision, and New Zealand has lost $400 million. What about the South Island? They are being forgotten by the National Party. And we could build a ferry terminal every year forever if we didn't give people who own multiple houses a tax cut, that listener says. And Paddy from Dunedin, how is food and other necessities going to get from one island to the other? Okay, if you live in Wellington or Auckland, Nicola Willis. And this one, $3 billion for tax cuts to landlords or $3 billion for new ferries? Tough choice, they say.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Tēnā tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Minister of Finance still expects KiwiRail to deliver new Cook Strait ferries despite pulling funding on a project that's had a massive cost blowout. Nicola Willis has told Checkpoint the state-owned company's plan to replace its ageing inter-islander ferries has almost quadrupled in cost to nearly $3 billion. She says KiwiRail has spent $400 million but still hasn't started construction on new ships.
We cannot see that this is good value for taxpayer money. The Ferrari is not the only car in the garage. The option that KiwiRail has had on the table is the equivalent of the Ferrari. And now we're going to go off and see whether there are some good, reliable Toyota Corollas available.
Nicola Willis says the government is still committed to replacing the fleet but wants a cheaper alternative. The former Minister of Health says plans to repeal smoke-free legislation are the result of dirty deals. Thousands of people gathered today across Auckland and Wellington to protest against proposed changes to smoking laws. In Wellington, Labour's health spokesperson Aisha Verrill addressed the 1,000-strong crowd, saying the National Party never campaigned on repealing the law.
This is the result of a dirty deal done in a back room. And we know smoke-free is incredibly popular because of how important it is to our health.
Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says smoking rates will still go down under his watch. A new draft final agreement has been published at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai. It calls on countries to transition away from the use of fossil fuels, but not phase them out, as had been demanded by many of the participants at the meeting. The text was published after marathon talks in Dubai. The BBC's Carl Naisman is there.
We know that there were ministers and delegates still in those backroom negotiating rooms until about 3 a.m. last night, trying to work out some sort of language that everybody here can agree on. And remember, at these COP summits, it has to be a unanimous decision. So it's not a surprise maybe that this has been a difficult negotiation, but still there has been some visible frustration from a lot of people that we've been talking about, just given what's at stake.
Green Party MP Chloe Swarbrick has refused to apologise for calling statements made by the Prime Minister a lie. Christopher Luxon was being asked about New Zealand's commitment to the Paris Agreement in question time this afternoon. As he responded, telling the House the government wasn't weakening the country's climate response, Ms Swarbrick yelled, "That's a demonstrable lie." Speaking afterwards, she says she'll accept the consequences.
Ultimately, my point is that we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to tell the truth, and I'll work through any of the consequences that come through in the House as is necessary to keep the focus on the climate crisis.
Parliament's rules prohibit MPs from calling each other liars. An American medical expert says there was clearly a huge effort to try to save 5 men who died after being shot in the Christchurch terror attack. Trauma surgeon Andre Campbell has given evidence at the inquest into the deaths of the 51 worshippers killed at the Al Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Centre in 2019. The coroner's court has been examining whether the men's deaths could have been avoided. Dr Campbell says police and paramedics at the scene and hospital staff gave them a high level of care.
But we're not perfect. It seems like they try to do a Herculean effort to try to save his life during the time period, just from listening to the discussions with the other experts.
Andre Campbell says the men were fighting a losing battle against death. Legislation to axe fair pay agreements has passed its second reading. The House is in urgency as the coalition pushes law changes through before Christmas. It promised to scrap agreements that allow unions to negotiate sector-wide deals for cleaners, bus drivers and security guards. Legislation to do this has now been passed its second reading with support from National Act and New Zealand First. Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori opposed the bill. An independent investigator has found Dunedin's mayor, Jules Radich, and a councillor, Carmen Houlihan, breached the council's code of conduct. The council yesterday voted to accept the findings during a behind-closed-doors meeting. Timothy Brown has more.
In August, the Dunedin City Council censured Strathtyre Community Board Chair Barry Williams and called for him to resign following a racist outburst. But then the mayor, Jules Radich, downplayed Mr Williams' comments in an interview with RNZ. That led the former Deputy Mayor Sophie Barker and Senior Councillor Jim O'Malley to lay a complaint. They were then subjected to a barrage of calls and texts from Carmen Houlihan, who accused them of dirty politics. An independent investigator found both Carmen Houlihan and Jules Radich breached the code of conduct, with the mayor bringing the council into disrepute.
And lollies and makeup are some of the most popular targets for shoplifters during the festive season. The police's retail investigation unit was formed last year and gathers evidence to help officers arrest repeat shoplifters. Manager Matt Tierney has told Checkpoint that some thieves shoplift 40 or 50 times before they're arrested.
Predominantly it's smaller things that can be easily sold on or used themselves. Chocolate, that has been something of the recent times. Beauty products are still a really highly stolen item, as are things that are like Eclipse mints, the tin cans.
Matt Tierney says other common targets include meat, shoes and small electronic devices such as phones. Koinanga pito pito kōrero. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1pm we're playing Link 3. In sporting history, we look at New Zealand's only global professional tournament, known most recently as the ASB Classic. And Ben Keeps is in Solving the World's Problems. He says social cohesion is failing. And and it's all related to the fact that we know our rights as citizens, but very few of us know our obligations. He makes a call for compulsory civics education when he joins me on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan from 1 p.m. tomorrow on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. In the west, from Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning and fine breaks increasing. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods developing tomorrow evening. Westerlies rising to gales south of Hastings tonight, easing tomorrow morning. From Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing this afternoon. Fine and cloudy periods tomorrow. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine apart from a few showers in Bulla and northern Westland today. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy with a few showers, clearing to fine this afternoon. Tomorrow, cloudy periods. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine apart from coastal showers today. And Rekohu, Chatham Islands, showers gradually easing tomorrow. It is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Visiting cruise ships are causing commuter chaos in Auckland's Waitemata Harbour. Last night, the Celebrity Edge broke its moorings in high winds at Prince's Wharf. That meant 10 commuter ferries had to be cancelled and others were left bobbing in the harbour, unable to dock until the cruise ship was secured. It is not the first disruption caused by a passenger ship. Earlier this week, several ferry services were cancelled because of a medical incident, and this evening more commuter ferries have been cancelled and some delayed due to the cruise ship departing, a regular occurrence during the season. Port of Auckland CEO Roger Gray explains what happened with the mooring.
The Celebrity Edge was alongside yesterday, and as everybody knows, we had some pretty severe gusts of wind. At about 6 p.m. last night, we had a severe gust of wind of about 38 knots. That meant that mooring line broke, and off the back of that, the ship's master started the booster to keep the ship alongside until we could resecure the line. So unfortunately, that led to a number of ferries being cancelled because the booster was operating, and we do apologise for that.
So it was an actual line, not the infrastructure, if you like, alongside the wharf where it was tied up?
Yeah, it was a combination of both a line and one of the bollards also came away. So it was a bit of both. It was a very severe gust of wind, and certainly something more than we had anticipated or forecast.
Well, does that say we've got a pretty shabby tie-up for cruise ships?
No, what it says is that we've got some pretty old infrastructure. And we do acknowledge that operating within the ferry basin is not a long-term solution for the port. That's why we're keen to further invest in Bledisloe North Wharf potentially, and look to put the bigger cruise ships onto a better wharf that's less disruptive to the city in these sort of conditions.
I want to talk a bit more about that, but first off, are there any repercussions for what happened last night? Because you had 10 ferries that were cancelled, commuter ferries, and then there were others left bobbing around in the harbour because they couldn't come in and dock because that cruise ship wasn't completely under control. So does anyone get pinged for that?
Not that I'm aware of in regards to a commercial fine or anything. I'm sure that Fuller's has incurred costs, and as will Auckland Transport, but no one's approached us yet about that matter.
Okay, and earlier this week there was a medical incident relating to a cruise ship, and that stopped commuter ferries as well. Why did that stop the commuter ferries?
What happened was the ship was leaving. Just as it was leaving, one of the passengers had a heart attack, and as a result of that medical incident, it was deemed better for the patient to bring the ship back alongside and to get the medical treatment than it was to continue out. So we brought the ship back alongside.
And that is incredibly unfortunate, but there's also been some other incidents. Well, the regular departures of the cruise ships, they stop the commuter ferries going. Is there no way that both can operate at the same time?
The Harbour Master's done a risk assessment of having cruise ships in and working side by side with the ferries, and there's quite a protocol which has been prepared and developed. And what it basically says is that we have to bring the ships in before 6:30 in the morning or after 9 o'clock in the morning, and we have to not leave between 4:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. So that's what we've agreed, and we stick to that because that then gives clear water. We wouldn't have been disrupting, apart from the fact that the booster, the bow thruster had to be turned on to guarantee that the ship was kept safe yesterday.
Yeah, but the reality was it was highly disruptive. And just on those hours of operation, 6:05 p.m. in Auckland, biggest city in the country, that's still commuter peak, isn't it? And you can bring in a cruise ship and disrupt the commuter ferries.
Yeah, look, that's the agreement that's been struck for quite a significant period of time prior to my arrival.
Does it need to change?
Auckland. Well, I think there's a valid point to have a review of that, because I don't disagree with you. 6 p.m. is relatively early and still part of the peak. So I'll certainly take it on to have a discussion with Auckland Transport.
What do you reckon would be reasonable, Roger? What do you reckon would be reasonable?
I probably think 7:30 is probably more reasonable.
Yeah, so, I mean, is there another modern city that you can think of with a, modern port, commuter system, all the rest of it, inviting cruise ships in, where they have the same kind of arrangement that we do, where regular commuter services are interrupted in order that these cruise ships can get in and out?
Yeah, Sydney.
Right.
Sydney Cruise Terminal is right next to Circular Quay ferry wharfs, so they have the same issue of interacting. And in certain circumstances, if the ship has to put on the bow thrusters, I'm sure that's going to disrupt operations in Sydney ferries as well. So it is quite common, but as I said, we are keen to try and look at a long-term solution for the city.
Right, which brings us back to your earlier point and your desire to have a dedicated wharf for the cruise ships and something more sophisticated. Would that make a difference in terms of being able to coexist in the harbour, if you like?
Yeah, we'd certainly be looking to exit the ferry basin and using Prince's Wharf as quick as we could once the new wharf is constructed. And we'll certainly be working with council in the new year to look at seeing if we can start to engage with the community consultation and consent for the construction of the Bledisloe North Wharf, which will take a couple of years once we get consent.
Yeah, so realistically, you're talking, 2026 to be anywhere near finished?
Yeah, that'd be right.
Okay, so in the meantime, you have said that maybe you'll have a discussion about the operating hours of the cruise ships. Are you going to do that this season?
Yeah, this is my commitment. I'll have a conversation with the harbour master and with the CEO of Auckland Transport before the end of the week.
And that's Port of Auckland CEO Roger Gray there, with a commitment to commuters that he will speak to the authorities about the operating hours for the cruise ships. It is 14 minutes after 6. Workers at a Hawke's Bay clothing factory say they were blindsided by a decision to close its doors. The Made It Here factory, which supplies boutique clothing company Kilt, told its staff last month they could no longer afford to keep the factory running. Now jobless in the lead up to Christmas, former workers say their job prospects in Hawke's Bay are slim. Kate Green has been speaking to former employees.
The news came to the factory's 14 workers in a PowerPoint presentation at an unexpected meeting on November 7th. One worker called it a real kick in the guts. Staff were told Kilt's store sales were down, the factory staff were doing a good job, they were just too expensive. All of the workers' comments have been revoiced.
Everyone was in shock. They just thought the meeting was about the Christmas closures.
All 6 workers spoken to by RNZ say they were asked if they had any suggestions for cutting costs, but they felt the decision to close had already been made.
Everyone thought that restructuring should have been an option first, downsize, and people were happy to take pay cuts, to take reduced hours, but they weren't interested in that. That's the hurtful thing for us. We weren't even given the option to downsize or compete with the other CMTs.
The newest employee was hired only 3 months ago, but others had been there since it opened.
I've been loyal to them for years, so it's a bit of a stab in the back.
The brand changed hands in 2019, sold by founder Melissa Williams to Victoria Walling and Lower Hutt. In a statement, Ms Hart says Made It Here had always been one of a number of CMTs, or cut-make-trim suppliers, producing kilts clothing. Knitwear is made by a supplier in Tauranga, shirts in Hamilton. A tough few years for retail, made worse by the current cost of living crisis, led to a dramatic drop in demand. She says they explored all the alternatives, including downsizing, but it wasn't sustainable in the current economic climate. But the brand will continue to produce all of its clothing in New Zealand. Dane Ambler, Executive Director of Buy New Zealand Made, says local manufacturers are slowly disappearing.
I would say it's quite bleak out there for the whole textile industry in New Zealand at the moment. A lot of the businesses we go out to see are the last of their kind in New Zealand.
He says as more brands take their business overseas, we risk losing a skilled workforce.
It's definitely a risk, and we've seen it over the last sort of 20 years, clothing manufacturers disappearing overseas. But there will always be a niche in New Zealand for that high-end, especially around wool.
For one former Made It Here employee, it isn't just a job she's lost.
The only thing that kept me sane and made me want to go to work was the girls, the laughing and everything else. That's what got me up in the morning.
She, like the other former employees, says she'll likely turn to a different line of work to make ends meet.
17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Palestinian officials say a military operation by Israel has killed at least 6 people in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli army says it launched what it called a counter-terrorism operation in the city of Jenin. Tensions have been rising in the West Bank because of the war in Gaza. The BBC's Lucy Williamson filed this report from inside Jenin.
Since the war in Gaza began, Israel's military operations in the occupied West Bank have become more frequent and more forceful. From the early hours of this morning, explosions and gunfire have echoed around Jenin, from the camp to the city centre to the hillsides around. Armoured vehicles have been moving around the city's main hospital near the entrance to the camp. Inside the hospital are the bodies of 3 of the men killed inside the city today in a drone strike, witnesses say. We're just walking up towards the hospital here where the Israeli army have positioned some of their bulldozers, just the drone overhead. You can smell the tear gas. Inside, I find the hospital director, Dr. Wissam Bakr.
The Israeli incursion that started about 4 a.m. 3 young men came to our department. They are mostly civilian people.
It's the second time in 2 weeks I've met Dr. Bakr here to talk about people killed during Israeli operations.
The persistence of invasion and incursion to Jenin and killing the young people, this will make the people inside Jenin more angry. This will not bring the peace.
Israel's defense minister said that hundreds of terrorists had been killed in the West Bank in the past year, more than half of them since the Hamas attacks. A youth leader for the West Bank's ruling party, Fatah, told me that support for Hamas among young people was now at an all-time high. Fresh idols for a new generation, he said, after decades of tightening occupation and fading political hope.
Ukraine's president has made an in-person plea to Washington for military and economic aid to continue. Volodymyr Zelensky met with members of Congress and President Biden and told them he was counting on their support. Congressional Republicans are refusing to agree to an aid deal until Biden makes concessions on border security and immigration policy. Meanwhile, in Kherson, Ukrainian soldiers are using cheaper one-way drones against Russia. CNN's Nick Patton-Walsh has the details.
Out of Kherson City, past the bridge the Russians invaded and left on, you reach a new phase of hope and anxiety in this war. Down on the edge of the Dnipro River, on whose isolated right bank, lone groups of Ukrainians are making rare advances into Russian-occupied land. But it's tiny tools, hand-rigged, donated drones and small gains. The US is stalling on the big money Ukraine needs to make the breakthrough the West wants, and you can feel the anger at that here. It is relentless work. I think it'll be very difficult without American help, he says. Our supplies are also ending, so we need theirs. We've had days so busy, we launched 15 to 20 and I got 10 minutes rest between flights, the pilot says. I never imagined this would be my war. It's the PlayStation generation headsets directing cheap single-use drones on a one-way flight into Russian lines.
It's just saying the weather's cleared up, the fog was just settled over the river, and the Russians are very aware of this threat, and you can see them now trying to find a target.
This keeps the Russians off the roads by day and helps Ukraine take ground. Now they manoeuvre towards a Russian checkpoint. Killing here, somehow remote, yet also intimate. Another prize target emerges, their Russian equivalent drone unit hiding in a red-roofed house, worth sending 2 drones at. The first, as it closes in, taken out by jamming. The second picks it up. The night in battered Kherson City is no respite for civilians. Sirens, yes, but also a series of Shahid Russian attack drones.
Lights off, lights off.
They close on us. The motor whine lower as it passes over our heads. Anti-aircraft guns pierce the blackout. There really is little life to be enjoyed here, and what's left rushes at the news there are rare food handouts. They're fast gone. The shelling is relentless. A woman injured here the night before, her neighbour knocked off her feet.
I don't drink, but yesterday I drank a bottle of wine. We all have our guardian angels. We women here are resilient.
Kherson, liberated last year, is still in the grip of the war. And unless they push the Russians back, a dark and bloody normal awaits.
In what could be a world first, Australia is on the verge of banning engineered stone, often used on kitchen and bathroom bench tops. Australia's federal, state and territory ministers are meeting to discuss a ban because of the health risks associated with making them. But there is pushback from the industry, the ABC's Michael Atkin reports.
In 2019, former stonemason Ben Harrison was about to turn 30 when he was diagnosed with the lung condition silicosis. Daily life is now a struggle.
I find it all pretty hard, to be honest. I'll wake up in the morning, try and get my kids to school and whatever. By the time I've done that, I come back and I'm usually asleep on the couch.
Silicosis is an incurable and sometimes fatal lung disease caused by inhaling very fine silica dust produced when the engineered stone is cut. The latest workers' compensation figures suggest nearly 700 engineered stone workers across the country have silicosis.
I wouldn't say it's great. My future. I can't do much now. I'm 34 years old.
Now Australia is on the verge of a world-first ban on engineered stone after the nation's safety policy body Safe Work Australia found it poses an unacceptable risk. The possible ban will be debated at a meeting of the nation's work, health and safety ministers today. Federal Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke spoke about it in federal parliament last week.
Every state and territory, whether Liberal or Labor, has now committed to working collaboratively towards a ban on engineered stone in a coordinated and cooperative way. The states have most of the powers there. There are some powers that the federal government has, but I can confirm that the federal government will be approaching this in the same way of working through collaboratively, coordinated way, how we can deliver on that recommendation for a ban.
Retailers Bunnings and IKEA have already stopped the sale of engineered stone products, but there has been industry pushback, with big names like Caesarstone and Smartstone campaigning to keep some products in use, albeit with tougher safety standards. Trevor Hasty is a former stonemason who supplies engineered stone to tradies in Cairns and wants to avoid a ban by shifting to lower silica products.
To ban this product within 6 months is really going to devastate the building industry altogether. We have builders that are saying to us, what do we do? What are we going to replace it with?
Safe Work Australia says there's no safe level of silica dust. The industry says any ban will have to include compensation, retraining and a long transition period, while unions say reforms to state-based workers' compensation schemes are needed to better look after sick workers.
In Taiwan, it seems fur babies could be taking the place of human babies. The country has the lowest birth rate in the world, with statistically fewer than one baby born per woman. However, as the BBC's Ed Butler reports, pet ownership seems to be on the increase.
We're looking at a few of them gazing out from their little pens.
We have more and more requests of owners who have to give away their cat.
So you've got more cats than you used to have. Are more people coming in and adopting them?
For sure. Young people, especially when they're young couples and students.
Interesting. Baby cats and baby dogs. Pet ownership, it seems, is skyrocketing in Taiwan at the moment, with furry friends now outnumbering the babies themselves. The writer and comedian Vicky Wang is one of the new generation of Taiwanese pet enthusiasts.
I am personally an owner of 4 cats because it makes more sense in a city. You come home and there's someone there for you. It's comforting.
I've seen a lot of buggies pushed around Taipei and strollers, as you say in the States, and they are quite often not containing babies but dogs.
I think that's a uniquely Taiwanese thing because you're required to have them in a container to take them on the subway. It's like a wheelie suitcase.
What's also true is Taiwan, I've read, has one of the lowest birth rates anywhere if you treat it as a country. Are pets replacing babies?
It's interesting. I am 37 years old this year. Doesn't really make sense for me to have kids anymore. I mean, it's a financial decision. It's nearly impossible at the current Taiwanese salary to start a family in your 20s. I am well into my 30s, pushing 40 now. I can't even consider it, like buying property somewhere in Taipei, hopefully in a decent school district. That's completely out of the question if I stay here and earn a Taiwanese salary. So I don't want to put a hierarchy between pets and human children, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone said, like, I can't afford to have a kid, so I am choosing pets.
Okay, some of your feedback before we head off the night on the cruise ships. Someone says these cruise ships frequently cause massive disruptions for commuters and residents travelling to and from Waiheke. The cruise ships definitely take priority and locals are hugely impacted. And this one on the ferries, the Cook Strait ferries, and the government not kicking in any more funding. Keep the ferries smoking, that listener says. That is about all we've got time for. Now, the Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening, and you can check out Checkpoint again on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up is on a tough assignment. They visit one of Auckland's most iconic ice cream parlours, where the original owner is passing on the scoop to his kids after 50 years. That will be a yummy one. 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Finance Minister says KiwiRail must maintain its existing Cook Strait ferry fleet to ensure they are safe, despite the government pulling funding on KiwiRail's replacement project that's had a massive cost blowout. A new draft agreement has been negotiated at COP28, calling for countries to transition away from fossil fuels but not phase them out. A police retail crime unit says it's the season of thieving for chocolates, beauty products and phones, with Retail NZ estimating $1 billion is lost each year from shoplifting. And Israel is looking increasingly diplomatically isolated after the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
In 1993, Peter Ellis was sent to jail for abusing children at the Christchurch Civic Creche.
So if I go on to tour the other two places, the Civic Creche case may never have been.
But Peter Ellis said he didn't do it.
Well, you don't
even think you're going to deal with something like this. So how do you deal with it when it happens? It was awful.
Conviction, the Christchurch Civic Creche case, tells the full story of the case that has gripped a nation for more than 30 years. Follow Conviction on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And you can listen to the series every Sunday after the 7 p.m. news on RNZ National.
Kia ora anō. Hello again, I'm Evie Ashton and you're with me through to 7 o'clock. Tonight on The Detail, as Netball in New Zealand gears up to mark its centenary, strong headwinds are appearing on the horizon.
"99 years ago, Netball in New Zealand became the country's first national sports organisation. It was called basketball then, a 9-a-side game played on grass with baskets for goals. It went on to be a groundbreaker, setting a style of play that the rest of the world was in awe of. The beloved Silver Ferns have won our hearts.
Can you believe it? It's all over! New Zealand netball stand tall!
And broken our hearts over and over again.
So good. History in Birmingham. They have beaten New Zealand 67-51. It has been a thumping by the Sunshine Girls.
It's still the top sport for women and girls, with 350,000 participants. But on the eve of its centenary, has netball lost its way?
A huge milestone for Netball New Zealand coming up next year. I wouldn't go as far as saying the sport is in crisis, but I do think it's reached a real crossroads, and netball leaders, they need to make some bold decisions and show some real ambition for the sport if it is going to survive in another 100 years.
I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and that's RNZ's in-depth sports correspondent Dana Johansson. Today on The Detail, what does New Zealand netball need to do to thrive for another century?
What Australia have done very well, it's kind of the Hollywood effect for me. I just think they've made a league that sparkles and shines and everyone goes, I want a piece of that. And actually, there's some really good stuff going on in the UK and in New Zealand, but we haven't quite captured that appeal yet.
We'll hear more from former England player and commentator Tamsin Greenway. But first, Dana on the Silver Ferns. They had such mixed results this year, a bronze at the World Cup, and later an embarrassing loss to England's development side.
I think that some of those competitive struggles need to be looked at in context of the Silver Ferns' broader history. I don't think they're any more or less competitive than they were, say, 10 or 20 years ago. The issues that impact the Silver Ferns more recently are the same issues that have affected them for decades, and that's the lack of depth, because we are a small nation, we don't have a lot of resource, so in that respect we punch above our weight. The bigger concern for me is that Netball New Zealand really led the way in terms of the commercialisation and professionalisation of the sport. You think back to the sort of mid to late 90s, Netball New Zealand was leading the way. It had a semi-professional women's competition, which was groundbreaking. It essentially professionalised at the same time that rugby was taking those steps into professionalisation.